I'll be talking about Fasanella and memory, migration memory and material culture. Now, let me start with, I'll use three keywords, seeing, objects, and memory. And so let me start with the first one of those, and with seeing. So art, as John Berger so eloquently wrote, is first and foremost an exercise in seeing. And seeing is both our first act and the way that we position ourselves in the world. With Fasanella's paintings, as we all know, as we've been seeing, there is so much to see. They teem with people, with objects, with details. We look, and then we look again, and we see something else, and we see something more. And I should know, I spent 4 months in spring 2021 teaching my first ever course at Stony Brook, which was a course on Italian-American culture, its migrant roots and routes, with a poster of one of Ralph Fasanella's paintings behind me, reflected back at me as I taught into the void through a Zoom link. And every week, at every lesson, there was something else to see. The large pieces in particular draw us in through their intricate city landscapes and topographies. Their multiple focal points direct our gaze to one place after the other. So we come back for more again and again, yet always with the feeling that we are missing something. Even as we discover so much, we know that the artist, that Fasanella himself, so sees more than we do. That is the first act of seeing, of course, that is inscribed in each painting. Ralph Fasanella's own gaze, his attention to the world around him, its changing features, its rhythms, its movement. The paintings record that attention, that gaze, and at the same time, his own changing position within the world, on the streets, in railway carriages, inside the garment factories where his mother worked, following the routes of his father, that his father took as an iceman, and then moving to and through suburbia, as migrant families and communities did in those same years and decades. There is, however, a further act of seeing that he is embedded in Fasanella's paintings. And that is a way of seeing which reverses the gaze and implicates us in the stories that those paintings tell. And implicature is a concept that I'll return to towards the end of this talk. We are all also being looked at repeatedly, insistently, by many of the people in Fasanella's canvases. I was thinking about this yesterday as Paul D'Onofrio was walking us virtually through the fantastic exhibition at the Fenimore Art Museum. He was talking about the importance of portraiture in Fasanella's art, and he showed us at one point a portrait of a woman framed by a window, as she is presumably gazing at the street and is also, in fact, gazing at us. And D'Ambrosio reminded us that such a framing is unusual for Fasanella, and that is true in his portraits. And yet, that observation sent me back to other paintings, to the many innumerable windows in his cityscapes and urban scenes. Some are empty, some are dark, some are closed off to our gaze, but so many of the others are alive with figures of women, men, children, looking out onto the streets, watching their community. The games going on in the street, the passing trade, the increasingly thick queues of modern cars, and also looking at us. As is often the case with Fasanella's art, it triggered my own associations, brought me to the people in his paintings with and connecting those with even more people, different and yet related scenes. I ended up yesterday, after listening to Paul D'Ambrosio, thinking about Spike Lee's Neighborhoods, of his characters watching the world from a window or sitting at a street corner, and of how their gaze too shapes ours as we watch films like Do the Right Thing. Of how that gazing, that framing, that permeable border between inside and outside, between these different spaces, between what is intimate and what is shared, works as a cipher of a community. But let me move to my second point, or my second keyword, which is objects. That tension, that fluidity between the intimate and the public, the interior and the exterior life of the community, also marks the way in which Fasanella deals with material culture. Objects, as Daniel Miller noted, make us as much as we make them. In Fasanella's paintings, we see a plethora of objects, each carrying its own significance, each signifying as a sign of a visual code which speaks of reality as much as it speaks of desire. And this is crucial, I think, to talk about migrant communities and their inheritance, the inheritance which was Ralph's as much and very much together with his class and political identification. And it was wonderful to see in the film, for instance, how he talked about roots as memory, roots and memory, not as an ethnic mechanism of exclusion, but rather as a sense of sharing and common identification. Migration is always made of push and pull. It is made of loss and gain. It is made of trauma, and it is made of desire. In Fasanella's paintings, we see the toil, the labor of men and women crucified by their job with a capital J, as spelled by Pietro di Donato, the writer and friend of Fasanella, whose Christ in Concrete inspired Ralph's depictions of his father in particular as the Iceman crucified. But we also see the dignity of the objects of that labor, which are constantly present in rows and become actors, protagonists in some of the paintings. And we also see the dreamlike quality of some of those material possessions. Much as consumer culture is alien to the ideals of Fasanella, to his imagined community, he has an eye for its encroaching presence, but also for the pleasure that comes from the simpler materiality of leisure, the games played on the street, the days out on Coney Island, the dreamlike quality of a giant roller coaster. And then there are his interiors. I absolutely fell in love with his depiction of intimate spaces, such as this one of his apartment on the corner of Grove and Bleecker Street in downtown Manhattan. And once again, my own associations started to emerge. For the past 2 years, I have been taking my students, virtually again, to the Baldizzi family's flat, reconstructed at the Tenement Museum, also in downtown Manhattan. That flat, its patterns, its cramped yet colorful, simple yet exuberantly rich decoration speak of that tension between reality and desire, between daily struggles and dreams that is at the heart of the migrant experience, the one of Italian-American families such as Ralph's, but also that of so many others. Again, so beautiful to hear Ralph speaking about the Chinese workers in the sweatshops taking the place of the Italian-Americans in the film we just saw. So the parallel between these two images was so striking. I even wondered whether the Tenement Museum actually took inspiration from Fasanella's painting at that point. In this and in other images, there is also a further powerful driving force at play, the work of memory. In distorting and reshaping space, Fasanella, far from being simplistic or failing in reproducing accurate perspective or being primitive, indeed, as we were just hearing, well, what he's actually doing is also reshaping time, as in Old Neighborhood, where through the presence of objects, through clothes, through material culture, he is signaling the presence of different moments in time, the seen and the remembered, what we see with our eyes and what we see through the wealth of our affects and experiences. Memory is at the heart of Fasanella's syncretic and deeply anti-simplistic, deeply unrealistic way of imagining community. And it is with memory that I want to close these short reflections. Lest we forget is the exhortation, or perhaps the warning, which is inscribed in the bricks at the top of Family Supper, one of the pieces by Fasanella to which I, like everybody else, I'm sure, keep returning again and again, to see more, to think more. That sentence, lest we forget, returns in many of the other paintings and has become a sort of motto associated with his work. It is also, by the way, lest we forget, is also the opening line of the epilogue in one of my favorite books on migrant art, Mary Jo Bona's Women Writing Cloth. She starts her epilogue exactly with that sentence. But memory, lest we forget, is not just about the past. Memory, Derrida wrote, is linked to the future. The future is its memory, and memory is a future-making act. Remembering our past, who we were, is a way of telling the story of who we are, first and foremost to ourselves. And telling the story of who we are allows us to imagine who we will be, who we want to be, the community we want to build, the world that we desire. And this is something that I think Fasanella understood deeply. In this painting, in Family Supper, in this amazing masterpiece, memory speaks through each object, through each piece of furniture, the trunk, the folding bed, each instrument of daily activities, starting from the ice bucket or the food in and on the ice box. And it is, these are as individual, these memories are as individual as they are shared by any immigrant family, as Fasanella himself again said in the film that we just saw. Memory also speaks through the street scenes at the bottom of this painting, which are at once a predella, as in the medieval altarpieces, and this, after all, is a Last Supper, is an almost religious piece, and they're also a depiction of the shops which used to occupy the street front of tenement buildings. What speaks to us through that memory is a sense of the past which remains active into the present and allows us to build, but first to imagine, for there is no building the future without imagining it first, as Antonio Gramsci taught us all. So it's a present that allows us to build a common future, a future for which we are responsible, in which we are implicated, to use Michael Rothberg's aptly chosen word, because, as Ralph Fasanella understood extremely well, we are the communities that we build. Thank you.